Thanks so much for joining us for this session. So my name is Lauren Nagel. I'm the Group Creative Director at Pandora. What that means is that we're essentially a little in-house agency. So if folks want to advertise on Pandora, we will actually make their design assets and audio spots for them. So I've probably partnered with lots of people in this room, hopefully, to make awesome things for the Pandora platform. And I'm going to do quick intros of all of our kick-ass panelists. But first, why are we even talking about audio? I feel like everyone sort of knows that audio is like the redheaded stepchild of creative. No one wants to work on it, and we really want to sort of bring this into the light and talk about the way that we're sort of experiencing this audio renaissance right now. So super quickly, how many people listened to something today? Anyone? All right. Exactly. So according to a recent Edison study, we learned that 75% of consumers say that music is their top choice of entertainment, and Americans are spending more than 4 hours every day with audio. So if you think about how this is happening and really why this is happening, technology has totally changed the way that we consume audio, and thus it must also change the way in which we are delivering our messages through this medium. So if you think about mobile, of course, our audio experiences are seamless. We can listen to music or podcasts or whatever content we want from the time we wake up through our alarm clocks, through all of our devices, on our commutes, at work, at the gym. Obviously, we're creative. We all hit the gym.
Sure.
And
sure. Every day.
through essentially any experience that we have in life, our audio is with us. And I think the other interesting thing about audio right now is that most of us are in earbuds, and this is a really intimate experience. With audio, you literally have the opportunity to be the voice in somebody's head. So I'm really excited to talk to our panelists this morning about sort of reimagining audio in this new renaissance. From everything from voice activation to VR, we are seeing a really new way of imagining audio in the creative and the consumer space. So enough of that. Our panelists, each of our panelists this morning has a really unique perspective on audio and kind of how we're taking the most original and fundamental storytelling method into the light. So Christopher Smith, here to my right, brings a wealth of expertise as a writer and creative director and the radio guy at Dallas advertising agency, The Richards Group, having worked with numerous clients from Motel 6 to Home Depot to Red Lobster and racking up numerous awards along the way, although I think you call them paperweights. He's also a 2-time Jeopardy champion, which I only say because if you are a 2-time Jeopardy champion and no one puts that in your bio, like what's the point of having done all that?
It's all downhill from there.
Right? So Julie here in the middle is the executive creative director at Pandora. So Julie leads the in-house agency that handles all the marketing, design, and content for the Pandora brand. Julie actually started her career in Chicago at Leo Barnett, then went to FCB San Francisco and was the global creative director on the global Levi's account, and then left the agency world, to become the creative strategist at Facebook, Instagram, before joining us at Pandora. So Julie, I'm really excited to talk to you almost from the perspective of an art director by trade in the audio space.
I'd like to point out, not a Jeopardy champion.
No, I just didn't put it in my bio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. She's on pressure level.
Yeah. And Sam Crowler is a pioneer in the understanding and application of sound in media, marketing, and advertising, having worked across the radio industry at Global Radio and Bauer Media over on the other side of the pond. He now heads up creative development for the startup A Million Ads, which delivers dynamic creative and personalization for digital audio. So very excited to kind of tap into what the heck that means.
Yeah.
So to kick us off, I would love to just start first with you, Sam. You know, I think, again, it's a stereotype that creatives, especially in the agency world, don't want to work on audio. So I'm very curious about how you got into the audio space and really why. Was it an accident?
Well, there's a reason I'm sitting on the right-hand side of this panel here. I'm poorly equipped to actually to have a career in sound because I'm mono-aural. I only have hearing out of one ear. I probably, yeah. I'm completely deaf in my right ear. Awesome. And it was my primary school teacher that discovered this because my attention in class was absolutely terrible. And then they realized I wasn't listening to anything, hearing anything. My dad's a doctor. He hadn't picked up this. And the theory that he has is that I possibly had mumps that wasn't diagnosed. He's a fucking doctor. He hadn't even picked up that I was deaf or that I had mumps. But he wanted to challenge. Useless. He's retired now, yeah. But he did have this theory that the two hemispheres of the human brain have a bias towards factual and emotional information, and he gave me a musical education. And that really helped my attention, my reading and writing really improved. And so I was always, which is kind of unusual for most people, I was very focused on how sound affects the brain, because most of us subconsciously take it in, unless you're a musician or an actor and you're thinking about how the sound that you create affects the people that you're communicating to. The rest of us, we generally take it in subconsciously. And so that's kind of where my interest came from a very, very early age.
Cool. Julie, how about you? How'd you get into audio, girl?
Well, the interesting thing, as you pointed out, I was an art director my whole life. So honestly, my writer partner is the one who wrote the ads, any radio or any scripts most of the time. And then after agency life, going to Facebook and Instagram, I'm sure that many of you have heard, the presentations and the best practices from there. It's making thumb-stopping content is pretty much visual, right? It's a sound-off environment for most of it. And so I spent literally 2 years sort of in my wheelhouse thinking about how to visually stop somebody to pay attention and possibly activate sound. So coming over to Pandora, it was a little bit of a light bulb moment that I was like, oh, holy shit. Mm-hmm. We are an audio platform primarily. It's a very passive listening experience. Most people put on music and stick it in their pocket. Put on music in the house and leave it on the kitchen counter. So actually trying to figure out how to tell stories from an audio perspective, or vice versa, how do I make sure that when I'm rebranding Pandora or thinking about the brand Pandora, doing something that maybe is what music looks like, right? It's maybe embodying sound and music and the different genres of music in a visual form. So it was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me, like, holy crap, I hadn't thought about audio in such a long time, but also realizing that a lot of people are even listening to that while going through a newsfeed or, checking Instagram. So it was a little bit of a light bulb moment, and I realized, like, wow, there's a big untapped opportunity here because people are spending so much time listening to music, listening to Pandora, digital streaming services.
I remember the conversation that we had about a year ago. So there was a terrifying presentation here last year, if you were here, about the social behaviors of generation, I don't know, Z, whatever the like.
What are we up to?
I don't know. Yeah. The ones that are like ages 0 to 19 right now, so that your entire life has been on social media because your sonogram was on social media.
Oh, man.
Right? But it was studying kind of the behaviors of this age group of like after millennials and looking at what that behavior is, how they go through their different social media. And it starts with texting, and then from texting went to Snapchat, and from Snapchat it went to Instagram, and kind of like what's the importance of Instagram over Facebook, over Twitter, and how does that play out. But what was fascinating was before any of that starts, they start their music. So Julie and I were talking about this as we're constantly sort of looking for, how to emerge, how to stand out in this space visually when actually your audio experience is the one thing that's consistent through all of this other competing media. So
yeah, and one thing I think that remains true, just coming because I worked at Facebook, one thing that really rings true is that you really have to respect the space, right? People are looking at wedding pictures, of their best friend and, or a new friend's baby, and you show up as an ad in the middle of this, personal experience, and it's no different in audio. A song will remind me of like my first dance with my husband or when my baby was born, and you don't want to come in with something that absolutely is completely out of context and interrupts, the moment that I've been in the song prior or the song after. So that really remains true is respecting your audience, respecting the space, and respecting the headspace that they're actually in when you put your ad in these places.
Yeah, cool. All right, Chris, how'd you get into audio?
I'm pretty much the most traditional one, as she said, way back in college way back in the early 1990s. I was sitting in a classroom. I decided I think maybe I want to do this advertising creative thing for a living. I had switched from journalism because I learned, at least back then, journalists weren't allowed to make things up. So I said maybe I could be more creative in advertising. So I knew I wanted to write, and we were well. That's things have changed now. But I was sitting in this class and we were listening to reels by various agencies. The professor said, we're just looking at good work, and there was a reel by an agency I'd never heard of in a city I'd never been to, Dallas, Texas, called the Richards Group. And they played a spot by Tom Bodett, a Motel 6 spot, which at the time, this campaign was 6 years old, 5-6 years old. The campaign started when I was in 8th grade. And I remember hearing it, laughing. I can still recite it from memory. And I just went, right in that moment in the classroom, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do that kind of advertising, that sort of humor, that kind of stickiness, that funny but still has a message. I love that. And that's kind of why I moved to Dallas. I also followed my girlfriend, who's now my wife. Not now, it's 18 years, like we didn't just get married. But, and now I'm actually working at that agency, and I've been running the Motel 6 campaign for about 15 years. Writing on it for 15, running it for about 13. So I'm literally doing exactly what I said I wanted to do in college, like exactly. But you'd think I'd be happier, but so
Jeopardy, you have
kids'
Jeopardy.
dreams do come true. So that's me. So now and even though last year I produced probably 85 television commercials, literally, I'm an audio guy because most of the work I do that's national and gets the most attention is radio for a couple brands, but especially Motel 6. So I love it. To me, if I may, why audio is not the redheaded stepchild for me, for a lot of writers, is because to me, audio is where the finished product comes out the most like what it was in your brain when you first came up with the idea, because there's fewer people involved in, and I won't say changing it or messing it up, there's fewer people from A to Z that have their fingers in it. Basically, you come up with it, and then you produce it, you cast it, you do the music, and it ends up the most true to what your vision was. And for a writer, that's a lot of fun because it's rare. It's very, very rare.
Mm-hmm. It's inherently a writer's medium.
It is.
Anyway.
No offense. But no, on Motel 6, we've had some success. I finally, we were kind of getting a little dry on ideas, and I threw it to a couple of art directors, and they came up with some great stuff. I took credit for it, but I had to change the spellings and all that. It was good. Sure.
So let's get into the psychology of sound a little bit. Sam, your work in sonic marketing includes a lot of research about the effects of sound specifically on behavior. So what is so powerful about audio?
The main thing is it's the kind of quickest and easiest way into people's emotions. It's the way we express our emotions and the way that we communicate. And this goes into two kind of areas of psychology. It's the stuff that you don't pay attention to and the stuff that you do pay attention to. And the stuff that you don't pay attention to, the sort of subconscious communication, is the stuff that conditions us to our environment. So things like birdsong I always used to play in presentations, and we naturally get relaxed by that because for millions of years of our human evolution, we'd have used birdsong as an indicator whether predators are in an environment. If you can't see a leopard, the birds will always tell you if they're there. And then I saw some research when I first started in radio from a guy called Professor Adrian North, a British psychologist. And he'd done a display of wine in a supermarket, and half of it was French wine, half of it was German wine. The price point was very similar. And for a week he had French music playing, the French wine outsold the German wine by 5 bottles to 1. And the next week, the only thing he changed about the display was the music, and started playing German music. The German wine then outsold the French wine by 3 bottles to 1. But the most fascinating thing was everyone that went through the checkout was asked, was your purchase affected by the music? And only something like 1 or 2 people out of almost 300 even noticed there was music playing.
That's great.
Which is extraordinary. So what it proves is that this idea that we are bombarded with huge amounts of information, but we have to filter out what's important and what's not. And the stuff that we don't pay attention to is then affected by how we're conditioned to that environment. Now, the other side to that, the attention, how do you grab attention? Then you have to go to the psychologists of like Cherry and Broadbent, who talked about that filter, and they're very famous for the idea of the cocktail party effect. So if you're at a cocktail party, not that later on there's cocktails, isn't there? So later on you're having some cocktails, and
We'll
then you're having a chat with the people that you're having a wonderful conversation to, but then in the next group, someone mentions your name and your attention immediately gets drawn to it. And that just shows that, again, we're filtering all this stuff. But what is it that then grabs our attention? And I've looked at the sort of psychology of people like Robert Cialdini, a very famous American psychologist, and his psychology of influence all comes into this. And it is absolutely fascinating. What you realize is sound is very powerful because the way that these communicate and the power of it really comes from the emotions. That's how we make decisions as human beings. If that part of the brain that looks after emotion gets damaged, then people can't make decisions. They struggle to make decisions. They can function as human beings. And so when it comes to brands, advertising, making effective communication, that's why we just seen, a brand like Cadillac is focusing on the emotional attachment, that we have towards products, because that is what defines them. There's not a lot of difference between cars these days. They all offer electric windows and this and heated seats or whatever. The features are the same. So it's how do you feel towards it that stands out, and sound is so good at doing that.
So Chris, when you're building audio strategies, or even when you're working with other writers, are you consciously using some of these tools? Like, are you thinking about the psychology of sound? Sort of what is in your toolkit?
Well, there's a wine opener.
I knew that was. I just set it up and then.
No, honestly, the toolkit that I use as a audio storyteller is the same. What I like about it, it's the same toolkit that cavemen used. I was sitting around the campfire to tell stories. It's sound effects, music, and words, or grunts, or whatever. That's how you tell a story. The toolkit that I use, obviously, that all comes into play, but it's less overt. To me, I look at the brief, and I use the storytelling technique from film, actually, which is conflict. Where is the conflict in this brief? So on our briefs, we have several sections at our agency, and the one most people tend to focus on is, what's the single most persuasive idea or unique marketing proposition, or every agency calls it something different. A lot of people look there. There's a section where I look to actually, that's what I got to say. How am I going to tell that story? To me, comes a little higher on the brief, which is, we have two sections on our brief. What does the target currently think? And then what do we want them to think? And to me, that's where the story comes in, because that's the conflict, and that's where you can find, what am I going to say that's going to emotionally, make these people react emotionally? How am I going to change their actual thinking, and not just what am I going to tell them about my product? So that's where I start. So,
Great.
Toolkit.
And Julie, I'm curious about, when we're thinking about the psychology of sound or the power of audio, or even thinking about taking, you were saying you've worked on a bunch of TV recently. We were having a conversation about how writing for audio has actually made you a better TV writer. Julie, I'm curious about, as you're seeing audio strategies finally not be an afterthought, although I think in many ways they still are. How are audio strategies influencing the way you're thinking about digital marketing?
I think so much of it depends on the medium where it's being consumed. Pandora obviously is sound on. Like, I was just chatting with somebody a very smart lady from Instagram, who was telling me that Instagram stories, now that they've launched, it's actually like 70% sound on. So that sort of changes the game in the social sphere, where when I worked there, they didn't have stories, and it was literally the best practices we would present to brands and agencies was, number one was create for sound off. So I think it's actually completely starting to change the game now in the social sphere, but also when it comes to knowing that these millennials, there's that word again, are spending so much time listening to music. How do we actually influence them in a way that, again, feels relevant to them at the time, and not something that they're going to try to skip as fast as they can, or that they're going to hate? So I think everything's sort of changed, right? Everything's sort of completely blown up in the way people are consuming brand messages, period. And I think that forced view that used to be the TV spot is no longer. People have to engage. And I do think there's something interesting in scrolling through feed or tapping through Snapchat or whatever it is, that you're very quickly in and out. What's kind of interesting about audio is that your message in digital audio has to be heard, right? There is no skipping it. Mm-hmm. So whether you like it or not, it's a forced listen. But that's a good thing, right? Because it actually raises the bar creatively, I think, of where we need to be from an audio perspective, because we should, again, respect the listener and make sure that they're connecting with what we're saying as opposed to annoyed and turned off. And those millennials, they're turned off by everything. So you have to be really good. So just putting the care and the craft around audio creative, the same that's applied to, a 30-second TV spot or, an outdoor board or whatever is something I don't think that's ever actually had to happen until recently.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about the privilege, I think, in some ways that we have in that space, or the way that our content is transforming to be, all content is getting more and more personalized, more and more curated. So it's not just the way that we're listening that's more personalized, but what we're actually listening to. Of course, at Pandora, we talk about personalization all the time. But Sam, I'm curious if you think that audio is more uniquely suited for a personal storytelling experience. I'm curious about how you're addressing personalization specifically in your work.
It is suited very nicely because that storytelling is a kind of a natural thing. It's how we communicate more than any other way. I always say that it's what we do instinctively, and that's what we're trying to do at A Million Ads, is help brands do what humans do instinctively. So if you've met someone before and you remember their name and they've got a child and they live in a certain city, then you use that in the way that you have that conversation. And we in Britain love to talk about the weather, things about your environment, where you are, or where I should go and visit in New York in these next few days. All of these things we do naturally, and we're trying to bring that into the world of digital audio advertising. So we do dynamic, creative, and personalization for digital audio. So
can you explain that?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I'd explain it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
We have a system, it's a web-based system that then builds ads and can change the bits of audio that you hear depending on bits of data. So there are out-of-the-box bits of data we know. We know the time of day, we know the day of week. We know that someone's connected through an IP address. An IP address then gives us a location. A location then gives us weather at that location. So there's quite a lot of stuff that you can then change. You can change the lines that talk about, hold on, it's sunny, we should talk about barbecues and eating this type of food. And actually, we know then, again, more stuff around demographics. So someone like Pandora have got huge amounts of data about the types of people that are listening, their listening habits. So then we can change the music beds that they hear, how those music beds come in, how they're mixed, the tempo of those beds. Mm-hmm. The tempo could then fit the music of the tempo that they're listening to. I mean, any aspect of it. The sound effects can all be changed. It doesn't matter.
And this is all constructed automatically. There's not a person.
No. I mean, that's why it's called A Million Ads, because literally you could have a campaign with 1 million different bits of copy, and the system creates it all. And we did one for a betting firm, Sky Bet, and so we did the English soccer, football, Premier League odds for every single game of an entire season, 770,000 different permutations of an ad. The production time took about 2 hours.
My God.
2 hours.
As a writer, that's like absolutely terrifying. So I'll put my website together. Yeah. I'm going to be out of a job.
Next year there's going to be a robot. But
it's only ever as good as the data. Because if you go, okay, well, let's target people in I'm a Liverpool fan, so people in Liverpool, but I live in London and I'm a fan. And you're the same here. You have different fans that are in different places. So actually, as a publisher, you want to build up those databases and make them as accurate as possible. And when people volunteer and say, look, this is the music that I'm into, this is the sports team that I support, and then they get extra content around that, and it benefits them in some way, then they won't notice that actually the ads start to kind of fit with their interests, and the music fits with what they like, and suddenly that it doesn't seem such a conflict. You can still creatively create that conflict, right, but actually the environment is more suited to actually the stuff that they're choosing to then listen to.
It's amazing.
And when does that start getting creepy.
Well,
You know what I mean?
When does Skynet become self-aware?
Yeah, like
I think the most powerful sound in your entire life is your name, and I think the application of name in this is really interesting. And we've been testing the conscious and the subconscious use of name. So if I know you're called Lauren, you could wake up and go, "Hi, it's Starbucks here, Lauren. We know that you like this and this and that," and you're consciously relaying that data that they've collected back to you. And I think you would get pretty sick of that approach quite quickly. But the other way to do it is subconsciously. So what if it's a scenario about, ordering your coffee on the app as you're going there, and actually it talks about a latte or whatever you're into, and it talks about it being a Thursday and all of this sort of stuff. And then you get there and it shouts out your name, Lauren, and you're like, was that in there just as the script? I don't know. They haven't consciously applied it, but your attention is drawn to it. And I think that sort of application is much more interesting. Yeah.
Well, and that's a really interesting brand. I mean, just to riff on this, because Starbucks is a brand where in your interaction with Starbucks, you give a barista your name.
Yes.
So it's sort of like...
And then they misspell it on the top.
Correct. Inevitably. But it's sort of, I think about the ways that brands want to, again, sort of use the power of personalization in a way that really makes sense, as opposed to using it because we can. I see a lot of, as we start talking about this, suddenly people want us to tell stories where it's like, "Hello, Sam, isn't it sunny?"
No, you have to put them into natural conversation.
Right.
And that's what we're
Are you
finding
enjoying
out.
this, Sonny?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is probably one of the most powerful tools that we have in the digital, like doing these dynamic ads, is sequential. So at the moment, if you go into broadcast, you're writing a 30-second bit of audio that then you have to, an OTA, opportunities to hear or whatever, so you have a frequency. But in digital audio, because you can then create 1 million of these different copies, you can know that an impression has been served to that one person. The next time they get served an impression, it's different, and the third time different, and the fourth time, it could just tell a story over multiple impressions. And that's completely different thinking to broadcast advertising.
Well, and I think as creatives, that gives us so much more freedom. When we know that we're able to tell a story, when we know that a listener may have heard this bit at this point, and so we can build on that, or we don't need to be repetitive in the same way. What's the next part of this story and this message? I think that's fascinating. So, Chris, in thinking about this sort of personalization and nerding out around the data and the technology, and going back to what you said about sort of like the caveman approach of storytelling, how are you using data and technology in your work? Like, how is that influencing the audio strategies you're seeing happening today?
Well, it's funny because a lot of my clients, we're not quite that sophisticated. We're trying to be as targeted as possible, but we almost go the other way, where we have to be universal. We have to be. We're gonna talk to people that maybe necessarily aren't our target. So within the messages, we have to at least, that's where we tailor to who we're talking to. For instance, for Motel 6, we have found a real sweet spot with the fact that Tom Bodette and his brand is basically sort of the opposite of all of that. And where we have really found ways to use all this new data and these new techniques is sort of making fun of them. That Tom really doesn't understand that. And he's, we're getting a lot of attention right now for a spot we just did where Tom is like, I know the new thing is to talk to millennials. We had a technical thing, all right, I played for you, but it's an audio panel, we don't have any audio. But he's basically like, the new thing in marketing is to talk to millennials. So you may think this sounds sus, but Motel 6 is the best place to stay woke. And and it's just coming out of him. It doesn't quite work. He says, and the one I'm very proud of, the line is, and our prices are always low AF. Which I snuck by the client. And he says, what does that mean? I said, aforementioned. It's a short. It doesn't mean as fuck. If that's what you're saying. That's ridiculous. Why would I put that in a commercial? So that's sort of, but that's just a very specific example. But a lot of this, I found that. It's almost, as always, there's the action and then there's like the reaction. There's creative coming from the fact that people are overwhelmed by this personalization, and it's like, I just want to just entertain me. Like,
story.
So don't tell me all the copy points and how don't market to me. Just tell me a story and let me decide if I like it. That's sort of where we've had success. long answer, sorry.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like how to find that middle ground, right? How to find where it makes sense within the brand, where it sounds completely conversational and natural. I mean, I've heard the technology and it absolutely works. And it's also like crafting a story where that level of personalization makes sense, where you're not hitting someone over the head with, we know everything about you and we're using it to our advantage and we're getting your attention this way, but actually working on that more subconscious level.
Can I give a quick example of something that I think is a good example?
Yeah,
of this?
please.
Last couple of years, GE has won all these awards and accolades for this thing they did called The Message, which is, if you've looked at any awards annuals in the past 2 years, you've seen it. It was a series of podcasts which were sort of like an alien mystery sound from space thing. This was a podcast meant to sell like some sort of radio imaging technology for medical research. Like the number of people in this target audience is probably 500 people. Like it's not a lot. But they did this content that was basically a really good sci-fi mystery podcast, and they got millions of people listening to it. Millions. 99.9% of whom would have no use or interest in the product ever, unless maybe they got cancer, but literally would never buy the thing. And it didn't matter. They just put out this fantastic content rather than saying, how do we market to these 500 head oncologists at the largest hospital networks in the United States. Let's just do great content and people will go get it. And it worked like crazy. It beat out like Serial for a while. Like more people were listening to this thing and the message, even what the product was buried in there. So it was really cool. So they kind of went the other way from let's not hyper target, let's just do great work and people will find it.
Yeah. So Julie, I'm curious, I'll start with you. I'd love to hear from all of you on this. Considering what we do know about the fundamentals of storytelling, the way that technology is amplifying the ways that we're consuming audio, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes people are making in their creative strategies around audio specifically?
Well, I mean, from an agency perspective, I think one of the biggest mistakes is that you put your D team / intern on it.
On audio.
Yeah, on your radio scripts or on your digital audio. And I hate to say it, but I think that, or if they're fucking awesome, then put them on it. But I think what I've noticed is, and hopefully this will change, but is that was always sort of the thing that wasn't the opportunity, the thing that, was sort of the afterthought. And it was always, kind of like, yeah, that's good enough. So really seeing the opportunity to do something great creatively in that space, I think is a mistake that a lot of agencies are making. I also think, and part of that probably is what you mentioned. I mean, it was a book a long time ago, Hey Whipple, Squeeze This, that sort of literally personified radio as the redheaded stepchild. So I think it's, we've always sort of grown up. In fact, I think when I was talking to you, you were like, what's the last great audio ad you heard? And I think I mentioned Bud Light's Real Men of Genius, which I had to look up, and it was from '98.
Yeah.
That's
So
kicking my ass.
I'm sorry.
Aside from Motel 6.
I was saying throw myself down the stairs.
It was just the first one that came to mind, but it was sort of the thing that swept a bunch of award shows. But it was it was 20 years ago. So I think one thing that still rings true though is the theater of the mind concept. I think as we become in sort of this hyper visual world with the way we consume content on our phones in a way. That's a visual message is something that you take in, and it's pretty literal most of the time. I think the opportunity that is often missed is the old theater of the mind, that radio's theater of the mind, and that you have a chance to actually have people interpret or create the visuals to the story that you're telling personally.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that I wouldn't say it's even more personal or can be more personal because it's a story that the listener is creating for themselves as opposed to one that you're visually showing them.
Right, they're sort of participating.
They're participating, they're putting themselves in it, or they're imagining, the world that they're imagining with you narrating it, the brand narrating it. So it's just a different thing.
Chris, what about you? What do you think some of the biggest mistakes people are making in this space?
I agree that the main mistake that I try and keep my clients away from is people think, okay, I've got 30 seconds and it's wall-to-wall copy. I can say every possible thing about this brand. Another mistake is, and this drives me nuts, and it's a serious question, has anyone here ever in your life been driving or wherever, heard a radio commercial, heard the phone number, and written it down? Ever? Have you ever done that? No one does that. And every client I have, we got to put the phone number in there 3 times. No, we don't.
Yeah.
We really don't. Things like that. The main thing that I'm seeing with people finally finding audio again as the basis of the marketing and not just an afterthought is that people are starting to figure out, marketers are starting to figure out that audio in all this media we consume every day, audio is the one that you can consume while doing something else, and it sticks with you. You can't watch TV while doing something else, really, and pay attention. But you can actually use both parts of your brain, and it will subconsciously still get in, which is why podcasts, I think, are so expensive, because you can do them popular. You can do them while you're driving, and you can also do them at work and not get caught. And I'm serious, and people are figuring that out. Pandora, too. Everybody at my office has Pandora on all day long. So that you can actually do that, and it's still working. You are still working. You're not distracted by either. So that's what I'm seeing.
That's cool. Sam, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I just reiterate what they've said. I mean, it's the same sort of thing, but I mean, starting with simple ideas, good ideas, and what we say is talk to everybody with a great idea, but then you can add those other areas of data, and you can make it a bit more specific to that person in that place at that time.
Right.
And yeah, do that sequentially. So you can still do the great sort of idea that talks to everyone, but then just have that conversation that gets a little bit more personal. And particularly things like copying databases of knowing someone's a customer or not. I mean, that's just,
right.
Acquisition versus retention messages. I mean, it's...
Everybody wishes they had the button that I've already bought this product, can I skip the ad?
Yeah. Totally.
You got me. Now, can I please not hear the NPR pledge drive?
Right, well, and how do we use all of the data we're sort of traditionally using in digital and actually apply it to audio? So it seems like, in closing, the biggest mistake you can make is to not have an audio strategy.
Totally.
We definitely need to have one. So that actually is the end of our panel. That went by in like 2 seconds. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for being here.